Well, everyone, here we are. They let us get to Friday again. And that means it's time for another episode of TheLeaf Podcast. And in this episode, I got some really crazy stuff to talk about. We got soldiers on the moon, and a lot of stuff happening in Antarctica. So, it's going to be a wild one. So, like and subscribe as always, pull up a stump. And the first one that I want to talk about is apparently the soldier on the moon. So an American news interviewer named Brian Kilmeade was interviewing the Secretary of the Army in the U.S., Dan Driscoll, and he said something that kind of piqued a lot of people's attention. So what I'll do here is I'll read the quotes, like what one person said and then what the other person said, and then I'll place the article in the description. And yeah, I'll just read the full quote with the context, just so you get kind of the idea of what they were talking about. So Brian Kilmeade says, "So Gavin Newsom foolishly said yesterday, the president's having a parade for his birthday. It's about the army, and it's about Flag Day, and it happens to be the president's birthday. And this idea was actually brought up by the army by General George when Biden was president. But it was going to be much smaller. Can you shed a light on that?" Driscoll: "Yeah, I think there's two kinds of things here. I find preposterous. Thing one is as if the army 170 years before the president was even born could have lined up to be on his birthday. It is just insanity to me that they are pushing back on this idea that we want to celebrate our 250th anniversary with an entity and a body that has done so much for this nation, and that there are so many people that have this incredible connection to." And then this next part is the part where the little odd thing comes in. And then when the second thing is, to your point, the army started planning on this long in advance, because what we believe is that this will continue the strength in recruiting and retention that we have as young Americans across the country get to see all of the amazing things that the army has done, whether it's helping with the floods in North Carolina or the wildfires in California. And this is the part right here. Or, quote, "As we talked to an astronaut yesterday who's on the moon, who's a soldier, including actually going to war and fighting to defend the freedoms that make our country so great. We think this is going to be an incredible opportunity for the army to fill up our pipeline for the years to come, and I find it offensive that anybody is challenging that." So you might be asking why I read the full quote, and that's because I just thought it would be valuable to include context into what they were talking about on there. And for reference, I have no idea who any of these people are. I actually do know who the Secretary of the Army is because he's done interviews on Canadian media in the past. I think he has anyways, I could be thinking of someone else. But either way, I thought I would include this because he just said that they have an astronaut who's a soldier who's on the moon. So, do you think that the US military, or NATO, or whoever, has a moon base? Do you think that if we don't have one, that we've sent people there after 1972, which I think that is the last official time that we've been to the moon? I know that over the years, over the decades I guess, there's been a lot of talk as to why we've never been back to the moon. And then that leads to people saying, were we ever there at all? And I think that they kept going back after 1972, and they just don't talk about it because it's some kind of strategic thing. It's also very possible that he just misspoke, and he could be exaggerating, though the news would never exaggerate, But what do you think about this? Do you think that we've been back to the moon since 1972? Do you think that we go there quite often? Do you think that we've never been there, and that the whole thing was faked? Or do you simply think that the guy just exaggerated? Do you think that he kind of slipped up and let something out like that? I'm really curious as to what you think down in the comments. And better yet, if we have a moon base, what do you think we're doing there? Because I've heard a lot of those, I don't even know if you call them conspiracy theories. I've heard a lot of things saying that when humans went to the moon, we were met by aliens up there, and they pretty much told us to never come to the moon again, and then we didn't. But it seems that maybe we do have moon bases, and maybe we do have a lot more advanced technology than we know of. Again, let me know your thoughts down below. And now we go to Antarctica. I have a really crazy encounter that's just wild. But before that, I have this more recent thing. This is from phys.org. They say that scientists have detected signals coming from beneath the Antarctic ice. The stuff is known as Antarctic Impulsive Transient Antenna, or ANITA, and it's an experiment. The project consists of multiple instruments that are made to pick up radio waves from cosmic rays that hit our atmosphere. And now this is where it gets a little bit strange, because rather than reflecting off of the ice as they expected it to, these new signals appear to be coming from beneath the ice. It says the radio waves that we detected were at really steep angles, like 30 degrees below the surface of the ice. This would generally mean that the signals would have to travel and pass through thousands of miles of rock and ice before even reaching the detector. Now, usually this would make them undetectable because they would have bounced off everything else. And then Stephanie Wiesel goes on to say, it's an interesting problem because we still don't actually have an explanation for what these anomalies are. But what we do know is that they're most likely not representing neutrinos. And she says if we detect them, it means that they have traveled all this way without interacting with anything else. We could be detecting a neutrino coming from the edge of the observable universe. So what do you think's going on here? I know next to nothing about particle physics. So what do you think's happening? Do you think that there is something that's emitting a signal that far below the ice? Because as we know, the ice in Antarctica is crazy thick, and we don't really know a whole lot about the continent as a whole. So what could be down there that's doing that? Or do you think that in this case it is just like the machines or instruments picking up a weird signal? Do you think it's like she said, that it could be a particle that just didn't interact with anything else and come from the edge of the universe? Both of those things are really interesting. I also know, again, next to nothing about it, but I just thought it was a little weird and honestly a little creepy that there is a signal that could be coming from beneath the ice, because that's like the beginning of a horror movie right there. And speaking of horror movies or action movies or sci-fi movies, this is going to have elements of all of them, because this encounter is really crazy. So I will link the article in the description that this is in, but it was originally published in a magazine called Nexus Magazine in August or September 2005. And the guy being interviewed, or the guy telling the story, says that he was a British SAS officer during World War II. He said that in October 1945, he was called to participate in a mission that even his commanding officer had no idea what was going on. He stopped in Gibraltar, and then he was taken with a special unit to the Falkland Islands, where there they were made to do all kinds of intensive and grueling training, combat training, cold winter training, Arctic warfare, that kind of stuff. And the man they trained under was a Norwegian man who had once served in the resistance. Now at the end of all this training, they were finally briefed on what exactly they were there for. Essentially, they were recruited for a top-secret mission to investigate anomalous activity that had been reported at the time from a British base in Antarctica at Modheim, in the eastern part of the continent. They were also being tasked with, supposedly, to wipe out a German base that was there deep under the ice. Apparently, this secret German base was located near the British Modheim base, and they were told about various activities and movements going on in the region, as well as numerous German officials who had apparently kind of just sequestered themselves away in this compound. And if you thought it was weird so far, it's only just getting started. The group was then told that the original scientists that were stationed at the base and their armed entourage had claimed that they found a tunnel leading beneath the ice. This was followed by crazy transmissions over radio that said, "The polar men have found us." They also talked about ancient tunnels and that they found Germans down there. Now essentially, they were told to investigate what happened to radio contact, why it had been lost, and try to figure out who the polar men were. And keep in mind too, if this isn't already crazy, when they were being taken to this area, they weren't even allowed to talk to each other in the plane that they were in. They weren't even allowed to speculate as to what this mission could even be about. They were also told that there were great pains that had been went through to get them here, that the Russians didn't know, the Americans didn't know, the Allies didn't know. Nobody knew except for the people directly involved. And basically the last thing they wanted was the Americans and Russians to get wind of this supposed Nazi base in Antarctica. After this, the unit was flown over the icy landscape, and then they were dropped off at a point around 20 miles from this British base. This was all under complete radio silence. Once they were on the ground, they were basically on their own. The only assistance that was provided was some snow tractors left for them to use. Then, they stalked their way through the icy, inhospitable terrain. They were kind of worried about an enemy attack, and I can't blame them, given everything they were just told, and especially that they didn't really know what the hell they were getting into. But up until now, they had not seen anything else or anyone else. But eventually they got to this base, and it looked abandoned. The entrance was abandoned especially. They expected there to be a lot of people there, but it was just quiet, even devoid of life. And then the witness would say this afterwards. Instantly, our suspicions were roused, but just like in all the previous campaigns I had fought during the war, we had a job to do, and so our personal fears could not shroud our judgment. As we split up to search the base, a tripwire was detonated and a siren sounded, destroying the silence and startling the whole force. A shout was soon heard, demanding us to identify ourselves, but the voice could not be targeted. With our guns raised, the major introduced us to the voice, and then thankfully the voice was given a body. The voice belonged to a lone survivor, and what he divulged made us more anxious, and had us wishing that there were many more troops in our ranks. What this survivor told them was that there was another survivor in, quote, Bunker 1, where he was trapped with one of these polar men that they had heard about. The unit decided to try and make their way down to this bunker and try to open it. This was much to the objections of the survivor that they had found. He seemed terrified of this, but they warily approached the door to this isolated bunker, wondering what the hell was going to happen. They argued amongst themselves to see who would be the first one to enter, and then the youngest one basically drew the short straw here. The witness says again, he proceeded inside, hesitating slightly as he struggled with the door. Once inside, a silence descended across the base. This was followed moments later by 2 gunshots. The door was opened, and this polar man dashed to freedom. None of us was expecting what we saw, and the polar man had fled into the surrounding terrain so quick that only a few token shots were fired, out of fear and awe of what we had seen. We all decided to go into the bunker, and go in we did, and 2 bodies were found. The soldier who had pulled the short straw was found with his throat ripped out, and more heinous, this survivor that we were looking for had been stripped to the bones. Now, as you can imagine, this led to the whole force being pissed off, being unsettled, scared, angry, all those emotions. They turned back and they grilled the survivor that they found for more answers. They asked him why the dead man that they found had been stuck in the bunker with that thing in the first place. The survivor, who was scared and frightened beyond belief, tried to tell them from the beginning what happened. He said where they were was in one of Antarctica's dry valleys. It was devoid of ice and snow, which had facilitated the discovery of this tunnel that they talked about. After this, personnel were sent into this tunnel to see where it led, and it turned out that it stretched for miles and miles deep underground before coming to a vast cavern. This was supposedly warm inside, considerably warm. They said it was perhaps by some kind of geothermal action. The deeper that they went into the cavern, the more things they'd started to find. It seemed that the Germans had been there. Not only had they just been there, they had set up artificial lighting. They had built hangars and docks for U-boats in the subterranean lakes that were strewn about. They found a lot of excavations that were in progress down in the dark. They had no idea what they were looking for or what they had found. And now it turned out that the Germans had not left the area. They were still there, and they proceeded to capture and kill several of the survivors' expedition. The remaining members fled. They tried to block the tunnel, and this was when these polar men descended upon them. And this is what had caused that frantic radio broadcast at the end of it. He said that these were beasts with a mix of ape and human features that possessed almost supernatural strength and speed. What was left of the unit managed to retreat and make their way back to their base, but they had been split into several bunkers. One of these survivors had managed to lure one of these polar men into the bunker and locked him and the polar man in with it, which had then pretty much led to his death and the destruction of all the radio gear. The survivor then said that the polar men were the result of experimentation on apes and humans, although he didn't say much else. This information was shot down by the unit's scientist. He even turned around and called it hogwash, but the other soldiers gave it some weight because they wanted to know what these polar men wanted. And the survivor replied with something straight out of a horror movie. They want to wait, watch, and wonder just how different we taste. So upon hearing this, obviously they had some people in their force stay up to keep watch, and the next day they were ordered to investigate the tunnel for themselves. They made their way to the entrance in the dry valley, which the survivor had told them about, and this is where the witness continues off. Upon arriving in the dry valley, we were all amazed, for we had been told that Antarctica was completely icebound, and yet here we were, in a valley that reminded me of being back in the North African Sahara. We were forbidden from even approaching the tunnel until the temporary base camp had been erected, and whilst the men constructed the base, the scientist and major investigated the tunnel. After a few hours, they returned to the now complete camp to chronicle what they had seen and what our next plan of action was going to be. The tunnel was not an ancient passageway at all, claimed the scientist, although the major added that the walls were made of smooth granite and looked to be infinite. We were informed that we would be able to make our own minds up after we rested for the night. And I don't know about any of you, but I probably would not get very much sleep that night, and it seems that neither did they. That night, those polar men came back. They came to them in the pitch darkness. But this time, since they were ready for them, one was shot and killed. The team scientist said that it was some sort of hairy, cold-adapted human, and the corpse was purportedly put on ice for later study. When morning arrived, the major, the witness, and the survivor went into the tunnel with a small contingent of men, as the others waited behind to guard against further attacks and keep this mysterious body safe. And they did eventually reach this cavern that the survivor had spoken of. And not only that, but the lighting was there and everything looked as was described. But they had to keep to the shadows, because there were indeed still forces down there that were buzzing about. So they slowly went about laying mines and explosives. Apparently at some point, this unit was unfortunately spotted, and then they were pursued by both Nazi soldiers and those polar men. And then this witness continues. Upon reaching the tunnel, we needed to put an obstacle in the way to slow down the enemy long enough for the mines to detonate. Some mines were placed at the entrance to the tunnel, and when the explosions were heard, we were hopeful that not just the base had been comprehensively destroyed, but so too the enemy forces giving chase. We were wrong. The mines did indeed close the tunnel, but for those Nazis and polar men behind us, the chase was still on. In a fighting retreat, only 3 of the 10 escaped the tunnel: the Norwegian, the scientist, and myself. The rest had fallen gallantly in making sure that some of the party survived. After this, the unit supposedly managed to escape the tunnel to the entrance, and then close it up for good with explosives. There was little evidence left behind that it had ever been there at all. The unit was subsequently disbanded after this and sent their own separate ways, after being told that they were strictly forbidden from ever discussing anything they had seen. The team's scientist would go on to explain it all away, saying that those polar men were actually just unkempt, insane soldiers, but the rest of the group felt they knew better. The mission, in the meantime, was really swept under the rug, never made official. So I bet you're glad you stuck around for that, because that is a crazy, insane experience. I can't imagine anything happening like that outside of a movie. And it's like, when you think about it, how much of it is really out of the realm of possibility? Like, it's very possible that another nation could have a base in Antarctica. It's very possible that they could dedicate resources to building a tunnel. It's very possible that an enemy of said nation would want to take out that other base. Where it gets really into the crazy, insane stuff is just, one, how dramatic it is, but it was during wartime, or just after, and the polar men, what do you think they were? Do you think that they were actually human experiments? Do you think that they were like some kind of Yeti, some kind of Bigfoot, I guess, that could be in Antarctica? Let me know what you think about the whole thing down in the comments. And I think too, one of the things that I know isn't really talked about, because there was a lot of other stuff going on with this mission, is what exactly do you think they found down there? Especially that they were doing those excavations. What do you think they were looking for? Do you think they found anything? Is it still there? I mean, we'll probably never know. That is, of course, if this is real and not just a movie script, because if this was a movie, I would 100% go to the theater and see it. I don't know about all of you. But still, what a crazy thing to have happen to you. Imagine having something like this happen to you, knowing full well that if you ever talk about it, not only is it forbidden, but you're going to sound crazy for even saying anything like it. Like, you come home and talk to your wife and you're like, yeah, sorry honey, I was gone for 3 months. I went to Antarctica and I fought like ice Nazis and polar men. Like, of course, no one's going to believe that. So I can't imagine having something like this happen and how frustrating it would be afterwards. Again, if it did indeed happen. But yeah, let me know what you think about the whole thing down in the comments. And also, if you liked this episode of the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. You can comment, like the video, favorite the video, and all that stuff. Tell all your friends. And there will always be a place for you by the fire here at this channel. Thank you all for pulling up a stump. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you Sunday. And, as always, the links will be in the description for these articles, as well as a PayPal and a Patreon. There's super thanks and memberships here on YouTube, and you know the drill. So I'll see you in the next one. And yeah, have a good weekend. This was crazy.